It's alive! Today I was inspired by these shirts that are literally everywhere on Pinterest, but for some reason you never ever see anybody in. Wait, is that a sign? Anyway, we're gonna make it very different. Total reinterpretation of it. And you gotta stay for the sewing, because we're going through lots of basics that might be helping you out one day. I'm calling this one Sliv, Slay, Slits.
Loves it. Yes. Sliving.
The sewing machine seems to be working. Don't know for how long. Back to the basics with like basic sewing steps that I think for a lot of people will be quite interesting. So it's just basically a little bit of an it's completely open. White shirt that's a little bit oversized. It's, you know, something at least you can find everywhere. In this example they have like sort of like strips, loose elements, if you know what I mean. They're sewn in everywhere. My imagination, it might actually be quite cool if you do not have this sort of all sewn on, but make it a little bit asymmetrical. Want to actually try to make it sort of more integrated, so basically sewing slits upwards, sort of slits. It will make sense in a bit. I think it doesn't really matter where we place the slit as long as it's not over the nipple. If you don't want to have a nipple gate kind of situation.
Well,
I mean, I'm just gotta, I guess, stand straight and draw my nipple on the shirt. And on this side, I think we're gonna leave the pocket on and we're just gonna make them a little bit lower. Always hardest part is to get started. I'm taking 3 hours already. I was today years old when I realized I'm probably a freak of nature. Wow, my nipple is here. I would have never guessed. Always in the middle front.
well.
Can we keep this between us? I'm gonna decide where the slits come by just drawing straight parallel lines on the shirt. You can assume the middle front is a straight line. However, you cannot assume the side seams are straight. Usually they're not. Nope. Straight, not straight. You may wonder, who cares in 2025? Well, the point is, you wanna make lines that are parallel to the middle. Because as you may have seen, hem is also not straight.
Houston, we have a problem.
My nipple is a little bit in the way. So either get your nipple removed, it's not a big deal. Or we must kind of maybe try to free the mind and maybe it's not gonna be exactly symmetrical on both sides. We pretend the middle is not there, but then we have a little bit more freedom. I do want the strips to be the same width, starting over this strip over the nipple. I want to keep my panels quite wide because I feel like that's gonna make it look a little bit more luxurious. So I guess it's gonna be a bit more minimalistic. So this is what I mean. That's gonna be a panel and the bottom placket is not in the middle at all. Very open-minded.
Crazy.
We can still use the middle as a sort of reference, even though we're pretending it's not there. Will still make sense. Just draw on the slits as we like them. So that way I can make my panels quite a bit bigger without creating a highly uncomfortable media scandal. However, I don't want to get too close to the bottom placket. So we still need some seam allowance to sew our facing on. This is the width, but the panel's gonna be a bit smaller because of the seam allowance. Mirror on the wall. Does not have a nipple at all. We must go with the flow, I guess. I cannot think of how this exactly is gonna look. But I think the splits are okay. So for the next step, I think we should try to reinforce the whole front panels. It's gonna be expensive. Actually, for once I have that stuff in the house. I've been doing it with like spray glue, scrap fabric, which I don't know, I have a feeling sewing machines might not like it.
Surprise, surprise.
So I have the real stuff in my stash. H250, I guess it's the weight. It feels a little bit thick, to be honest. Might be extra luxurious. It's not like that fabric-y as normal, if you know what I mean. I'm just gonna try, I guess, to trace it directly onto this chisel. Or shall I trace it onto paper first? Do I have paper? Nope. I think I must unhem it first. I don't know, you can also cut the hem off, but... That was my side speaking that is notoriously efficient. Impatient. But as someone who always sets a good example, I'm just gonna seam rip it open this time. But if I'd wanted it shorter, I would just cut it off. Now is the time to change the length. It's nice that it's nice and long, I would say. If you ever had to deal with these folded hems and seams, you know how annoying it can be when sewing. Very much an upcycler's pet peeve, I'd say. So here I'm ironing open the hem nice and flat, so it's gonna be a lot easier to handle. Giving it a quick press, that will also not really hurt here, I'd say. Bro. close. Feeding the squirrel, knowing damn well I bury it and ruin all my plant pots, but I digress. So I'm basically gonna take the pattern of the shirt, only the front panel, but to save some time, I'm gonna draw it directly onto the iron-on interfacing. If the iron-on interfacing would be very flimsy or a lot thinner, I'd probably make a paper pattern first, because the goal here is to really be as precisely as possible. So I want the edges of the facing and iron-on interfacing really match up with my seams, deliberately not going over the seams or the bottom placket. Instead I want to attach it extremely close to the seam to not add extra bulk and thickness to the design. So there's not gonna be like really thick and clunky seams with like 4 layers of fabric. So pinning the seams of the front panel down to the interfacing, I realized my interfacing, of course, was a little bit too short. As opposed to having to pin it all again, I thought it was a great opportunity to show you guys later how you can solve it if you just have a little bit too little interfacing. It was very convenient that it was all really transparent. It made it really easy to trace the edges of the French seams. Alternatively, I could use the pins as the markings, just going all around again. Taking extra special care, the corners are on there well too. I had this little awkward spot at the shoulder where I didn't have enough interfacing. I'm just gonna stick a little corner on so that I can still trace the shape properly. Then getting the shirt off, folding the iron-on interfacing, trying to be a little bit economical so I can cut the 2 sides in one go. No seam allowance, no sorrows, just eyes closed and go. Okay guys, not gonna lie, I haven't like completely thought out how this is supposed to be faced, literally faced with the the facing. We have to face the facing now.
Faces everywhere.
The puns are punning, but we need to get moving. So I want to use the iron interfacing. It's nice and stiff, so at least it functions a little bit like a pattern. Then I have this fabric that is washed. I know it doesn't look like it. If you know what this is, let me know in the comments. When you have a fabric that's new, not washed, and you attach it to a fabric that's already washed, one of them might shrink a tiny tad, and then the facing might be maybe a little bit too small. Theoretical risks. If you don't have time to wash it, you can also iron it quite hotly with some steam, and that will reduce the risk as well. Okay, if your fabric is wrinkly AF, I think I might have to tell this myself. Better to iron it first, especially with a little more experimental sewing. It just tends to be always a regret when I take shortcuts or skip things. I do think what we know for sure is that we need the facing to be bigger than the iron-on interfacing, because we need some seam allowance that likely I'm just gonna fold in, iron in. It will make sense in a bit. But for the facing fabric, might think, okay, the inside doesn't matter, I might get it diagonally out of the fabric or something, but don't do that, you will regret it. Alright, make up your mind. We have to sort of improvise a little bit, putting the interfacing onto the fabric of the facing, like I would a regular pattern, but this time, seam allowance. I do really want to be precise. At the hem we don't need an extra centimeter, because we already unhemmed it. All the other edges around neck, shoulder, front, side, I'm gonna just all add 1 centimeter more. Making a few markings, with the emphasis on a few. I'm still a very efficient, impatient person. If you're not sewing that often, I would just draw the seam allowance all around on the fabric directly. Alternatively, you can cut first and then measure if it's the right amount of seam allowance. If that sounds backwards to you, well, you got a point. What you gonna do? Unsubscribe? You do realize you cannot unsubscribe if you're not subscribed, right? Hint, hint. The idea is to iron the seam allowance in, so after all that effort to cut precisely, making markings at the seam so I can see where to fold it. And I realized transparent fabric is quite practical, so I can easily transfer it to the other side, as I can see the pattern from both sides. And like any curved seam, if you want to win, you gotta cut it in. Is what I say. At the armpits and the neckline. In this case, almost but not all the way towards the seam. The more curved, the more cuts you probably need. So allow the seam allowance to stretch open when it's folded, which I'm trying to demonstrate with my fingers. I ended up tracing the seam allowance to the other side on the window to see it a lot better. So I'd say normally eyeball it. If you eyeball the edges and then eyeball 1 centimeter, you're already eyeballing the same thing twice. This makes any sense. Sewing mud. Then you have sort of, at some point you might be a little bit off. We're gonna try to iron that interfacing on pretty precisely today. This sucks. Can we go home?
We are home.
Shiny side is gonna face the fabric because that's the glue stuff. First, just go with the tip of the iron on top and attach it in a few spots. So that way it's already a little bit fixated and it won't move. And you can see if it's gonna fit your surface and everything. And you can still rip it off quite easily and reuse the interfacing.
Just then.
I moved up, so now I can still easily get it off. It just happened, it wasn't me, but suddenly it was not in the right place. Nope. Probably I could have better started at the other edges and not at the hem. That's the only side that's open and we could still potentially crop a little bit of the shirt if the interfacing is too short. I don't think you can really iron this too long, to be honest.
A few moments later.
Well,
Just kidding, but I guess I was wrong. I'm always ironing it longer than the instructions, just to be sure. But some spots were getting a little brown. Maybe don't do that.
Don't do it.
Trying to evenly divide the heat also around the edges. I'm pressing quite a bit harder than I normally would with a fabric. And I'm pretty satisfied, because all the edges seem to line up pretty well. Except maybe at the shoulder, but you didn't see that, did you? Shh. Look at the difference between the two sides. I feel like if you want to have like a super luxurious shirt, you're just done. That interfacing is great. Crazy. Uh-oh, I did make a little bit of a bubble though. Let's see if I can still get that out. On the other side, the shoulder was missing this little corner. So I'm just gonna try to iron that loose corner on there, trying to line it up well with all the edges around it. Then we're at the facing again. Sorry if it gets confusing. Interfacing, facing, interfacing, facing. The order is a little bit different due to these experimental techniques. But I'm ironing in all the seam allowances all around, except for at the hem. This is why I made all these markings where the seam is, because there we have to place the fold. So I don't have to guess here. Cut in curves, iron open, very nice and smoothly. If they don't, gotta cut it in more. Now hot tip, hack, hip tip, top hack, whatever. That at least makes you look like you know what you're doing. And potentially is helpful. You know how sometimes when you top stitch over this, the seam allowance underneath might pop out if you don't really watch out. Now I once saw somewhere on the social medias this hack to fold in the corner first diagonally. Easiest when you already press the seam allowances in on both sides, just like I did here, because then you can exactly see where the corner has to come by looking at the folds. Iron this corner in diagonally and then fold the sides over it. I guess this might reduce some bulk in the seam allowance, but with a thin fabric like this I could not really notice the difference, to be honest. As long as the corners are nice and sharp and match the shirt's corners, it will be fine. Why not invent just another step? The more work, the better, is what they always say. I have remembered that wrong. But hear me out. This is extra work to make my life easier. Wait till you see it. Kind of a hot hack. Hip tip, blackjack. Now I have these thin strips of fusible adhesive. And if you're really lazy, I don't judge, you can actually buy them pre-cut on a roll. I'm gonna use parchment paper to apply the strips all along the edges, except the hem again. So we have an iron-on sticky border on our facing. You might have to let it cool down a little bit before removing the paper, otherwise you'll ruin up the glue. And note how I take precautions. Yes, me. By having one paper on the back of it all, because this stuff tends to get on your ironing board, like literally always. You gotta use a basting stitch if you wanna be that bitch. Well, no more.
Forget about it.
My idea behind this is that it's sort of functioning like a basting stitch, but better, potentially. So now I can apply the facing all around the edges without pinning, because I can stick it right on. In my mind, this is a bit easier to work precisely than just pinning and sewing. Felt cute, clever, really pleased with myself. But as per usual, not for long. I mean, nobody want me. We're not really at this step yet, guys. So I ripped it up and applied the Fusible adhesive strips again. Tiny detail, we first need to sew the slits. So I'm gonna apply the facing to the shirt, good side on good side, by pinning all the edges in place all around. but also pinning down the slits with some horizontal pins. I guess I could see them through the fabric, otherwise this would be a mystery. Just to be sure, I'm gonna trace the slits one more time so that it's crystal clear where they are whilst it's under the sewing machine. Now's the time to make some last adjustments to the facing.
This is your last chance.
Evening out the hem, as we all have crystal clear. I don't make mistakes, but it was a little uneven, just a little. Then we can sew the whole panel in one go. Kinda like snake, remember? That makes me sound old. I don't remember. To be clear, at the hem I'm gonna use a normal seam allowance. However, at the splits, I'm gonna only use half seam allowance, as the width of the seam allowance will basically determine the width of the slits. And we don't want the slits to get too slitty, I guess. So I'm sewing on one side of the line up and on the other side down. And that's it. Only in the end there's a little weird spot here in the corner because of the bottom placket, which between us I didn't really have a clue what to do. Nope. So how we deal with that, always ignore. Just forget about it and hope by the time you got to that point you gotten some kind of epiphany. Just skipping it now, and it's my strategy at least. First slit, so I'm lifting up the foot to pivot and create a sharp corner. At the same time, magically I switched from 1 centimeter seam allowance at the hem to just half seam allowance. That's the only confusing part. So I'm just sewing half centimeter next to the line I drew on. And this camera has a weird obsession with my small chin. I'm sorry it keeps focusing on that instead of on the needle. It's a little blurry, but I hope you can still see that I'm sewing like perfect here. Like it's absolutely perfect. I mean, it's a straight line, but still I wish you could see it. Then at the top of the slit we're gonna make 2 sharp corners again in the same way as at the hem, so lifting up, pivoting 90 degrees, making a few stitches so I'm half seam allowance on the other side of the line. It's just 1 centimeter. The hand wheel comes in handy here.
Several bad puns later.
Check. You could also count the stitches, then you can do all the slits the exact same width, which I'm thinking of a little too late. When it's finished, then pivot back down and sew half seam allowance on the other side of the line towards the hem, where I pivot and sew a regular bigger 1 centimeter seam allowance towards the beginning of the next split, and then repeat for all other slits. See how all the stitching at the hem is interrupted by the slits, but it still looks like a fluent line. I'm not bragging, I'm explaining. So now the magic is gonna happen because we only have to cut in basically the blue line. Finally, time for the slits to become slits by just cutting right through the middle between our stitch lines, almost till the very end. Just before the end, I'm gonna stop about half seam allowance before, because I'm gonna cut some corners. Now don't sue me, I mean cutting in the corners. So diagonally from the middle towards the corner, almost all the way. And doing that on both sides, so it will end up looking like a little triangle. Top tip, have a sharp tip. I never had a sharp tip. That can stretch open completely. You can imagine that looks a lot better when you turn that inside out. Outer corners at the hem, I'm gonna cut off the seam allowance diagonally to remove any bulk in the corner. About 2 millimeters from the corner, I'd say. You don't want to cut too far. I repeat,
Do not cut too close to the corner.
because then when you turn it inside out and you poke a little bit with something, it's really easy for the threads to jump out, and it does look very unprofessional, and unfortunately
Never happened to me.
my sewing pet peeve. Now we have these French fries sewn, cut and everything. Now we can loosen the borders again. This was just temporary to have it all lined up correctly so that we can turn it upside down, inside out. I hope this is gonna be worth it. So I'm just gonna carefully pull these things around, push the corners out. I often do it with a scissors, but I can't get my scissors in now. Whatever you do, you push them out very carefully, because once you push them too far, you can't really push them back, you know? They're gonna look weird, like they're gonna be uneven. Maybe this pen with a little, the tip is inside.
Much later.
That worked quite well. And then for the last little chef's kiss, extra little sleekness and sharpness, I'm just gonna use a pin to slightly pull the fabric out a little bit, but also again very carefully. So it might look a little bit messy and questionable at this stage, but it should be looking a lot better once we iron it properly. And some people have like a sort of stick to iron the seams open, even if you have like a tube like this or something. I mean this thing, and it's called apparently a tailor board. If you don't have it, I think I'm gonna press from the side of the facing. You must be a little bit creative and just press the seams open by sort of rolling them in between the fingers and the ironing board. And we don't want this pieces of facing sticking out on the outside, for example. Press, press, press to impress yourself and nobody else but yourself. Thank you. This was my TED talk.
12 seconds later.
Oh, it would not be a Hurricane Tuesday evening on the fashion rack before things go terribly fucking wrong. Are you kidding me? So, I put this edge. So I'm a cheapskate. I put the edge of the Fusible with the blue text inside. I thought that's gonna be fine. That's gonna be fine. That's gonna be fine.
Spots. Well.
SOS Operation Chemical Spot Erasure. My god, at the very end this happens. I already sworn to never make anything in a white fabric again. Did some spot cleaning with this pre-diluted Oxy Action stuff in a spray bottle. Threw it in a corner, then soaked it in a bucket full of my own tears. And the next day, it was gone. It's a miracle! Or the ink might have been water soluble after all. After that, I can also already iron over all the sticky borders that we created all along the seams, just with the tippy toe of the iron. It's more of a temporary fix, it doesn't really have to be ironed aggressively like before. This step is kinda optional, otherwise I've hidden all around the borders now, but I feel like with sticking, it's gonna be easier to sew. And it can also count as a little bit of a soft test to see if we did the puzzle well before. If it doesn't fit, you can still try to adjust it. When it does, I'm gonna go over it with the sewing machine, closing all the edges with a top stitch, pretty close to the edge. I'm also gonna top stitch all around the slits for a bit more of a professional look, hopefully. Dang, those corners were difficult, as the sewing foot was not gliding. The paper hack was not hacking, but I ended up making it glide with just a second piece of fabric on the side, which was much better. And often I find it easiest to top stitch close to the edge by moving the needle slightly left or right, so you can keep the edge of the fabric exactly in the middle of your foot. Lastly, closing the backside hem, I can still see where it was folded, so I'm just gonna iron it again, folding it in the exact same place to make it easier to sew. And right in the end, my sewing machine started protesting again. It's just such a diva. With the expensive threads, it's still sewing okay-ish, but as soon as I put in something that's unbranded, it just refuses and the thread keeps breaking. So I ended up sewing with the wrong color from the wrong side. Oh well, whatever gets the job done at this point. Slightly annoyed that my sewing machine it's just not okay. Nope. I guess it was a natural sort of point to stop to kind of like this slightly bizarre design. Subscribe if you didn't do that yet. Like the video if you enjoyed it. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you think. Leave a comment for the algorithm. If you don't know what to comment, the slit is the shit. Thank you to my Patreons. I hope to see you in my next video. Let me know if you have an idea what I can do on my channel. Nipple is hidden pretty well, I think. That I did a great job with. If you don't mind a little hoo-hoo, then you can wear it like this with the happy interfacing. It's sort of a luxurious look. You can at least style this. I don't know. You can put little I don't know how they're called. Like little clips to hold it together, or you can put a little belt like half through. Oh my gosh. I'm stuck again. Matched jeans is incredible, but oh my god, I'm constantly stuck. It happens to the best. Whoa, hey.